Hi, everyone. I'm going to try and keep things sort of both light and also not too detailed, because I think in these sort of sessions I could fill you with detail about the regulatory issues we've faced as small-scale farmers, but instead I've written about them and you can read about them later. That's right, this is a Meat Girls Monday at my place. I'm a small-scale free-range pig and cattle farmer, and just outside of Daylesford. I'm also the president of the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance. I'm going to kind of paint a picture of how lovely what people like us do. It's a very lovely life that we lead. This is my beautiful children in our beautiful paddocks with our beautiful pigs. As Chris referred to earlier, in the way that animals should be raised. And actually, as Andrew already pointed out, I was formerly a vegetarian. The reason for that was not because I thought it was immoral to eat meat, but because I thought it was immoral to keep animals confined in cages and sheds for the entirety of their lives. So becoming a pig farmer was entirely consistent with having formerly been a vegetarian, because we wanted to go and produce animals in a way that we thought was ethically sound. A quick bit of our story. 2 years ago, we crowdfunded I won't tell you all the reasons, again, these stories are elsewhere. Some of them are on the internet. We crowdfunded more than $1,000. That was just a little bonus that the Awesome Foundation gave us. We raised $27,500 to build a boning room on our farm. And a boning room is a butcher's shop. So we have a retail butcher's shop with a little farm gate outlet. And I became the head of all butchery at Jonai Farms. To clarify, we don't slaughter. We still take our animals. We take them ourselves to an abattoir, and the carcasses come back as whole carcasses, and then we do all the breakdown. And we have one staff member who helps me with that, my head meat girl. And so this is my boning room. And then we have volunteers. I actually have a roster. I have to keep a roster because I have so many people who want to come and learn how to cut with me. So they're very humble buildings. They're converted shipping containers. The second one, so the first one there on the left, that's the first 40-foot shipping container. They're refrigerated containers, so they're perfect for the purpose because they're already insulated, they're non-porous walls. The regulator actually, even, who you'll hear less charitable things about in a moment, quite likes them. The building to the right, we crowdfunded last year again to build a commercial kitchen and curing chamber so that we can now do single muscle cures. I've hung our first jamons and copa, lonza, pancetta, and soon we'll get our license for salami. Although with what's going on right now with us with the regulator, they may not be inclined to give me another license. We'll find that out soon. And the kitchen is actually the really exciting bit because it enables us to have a waste-free system. So now all the heads can be turned into pâté de tête or head cheese. The bones all get made into stock. So we're now selling all of our own bone broths, and nothing is unused. So when Chris talked about his yield, of course we're focused on how much yield we get off any beef or pork carcass as well. But we then take the next step and process things like the bones and the heads and the trotters. So yes, that's me being Mistress Meatsmith. This is another lovely thing that happens at our place, salami days. So we run 3 salami days each winter, 1 a month. About 30 people come up and we break down a whole carcass. We teach them how to make all of those single muscle cures. We teach them how to make salami, how to make other sort of French charcuterie like jarret farci, which is a beautiful way to say stuffed hawk meat. And they have a great day of making and learning, and then we have a big long lunch with, I think, you can't see them in this picture, but the band that you saw in the salami day in the film. So the Cider House String Band comes and plays at all the salami days, and it's a beautiful day. Oh, I'm not going to show that video because I'd forgotten the film would be played just before. My son made a beautiful 2-minute video of our salami days, and you should just Google Jonai Farm Salami Days or something and see it another time. So here's this beautiful life, right? Like we moved up there to do all these things and make all this lovely food and engage community and engage people with how their food is grown. And then there was government. And I know not all government is created equally. And I actually have to declare I worked for the government for a year, for a regulator, actually, for the higher education regulator. and as a risk analyst. So I'm not unclear on what risks there might be in food that we prepare. But what's happening right now is this emerging fair food movement is innovating very quickly. And what we all know is that legislative frameworks do not shift very quickly. So we have a major impasse in terms of where the legislation is at and where the movement is at. And we're actually losing innovators who are throwing in the towel, like Sandy Leatham of Hook and Spoon in Benalla, who shut down her shop because PrimeSafe, I'm going to redact what I was about to say, and just say because PrimeSafe. So now let's talk a little bit about PrimeSafe, though. Except I promised I wouldn't swear today, so hold me to that, all right? So PrimeSafe, for those of you who don't know, PrimeSafe are the meat regulator for Victoria, and Victoria has the dubious honour of being the only state in Australia that has a dedicated meat regulator. Every other state has an integrated food safety authority. I think the integration thing is good. I think that not having one sole focus on one thing is probably helpful. Wouldn't you generally say that in life? Perspective is good. For those also who don't know, raw meat is considered a low-risk food generally in food safety circles because you cook it, and so any potential risk is actually cooked out of it. Especially from a system like ours, where it's single-source food. It's, like hamburger mince in America that's gone through one of their processes could come from literally 120 animals in one hamburger patty. Like, that's a real thing. Ours, if you want to know where it came from, well, right there. So the risk in our system is much lower anyway because there aren't as many hands touching everything, and the movement from when we've processed it till it's got to the consumer is immediate. There's no long chain to increase the risk. So here, again, who in their right mind wouldn't want to hang out in my salami shed, right? Looks pretty good, right? Unless you're vegetarian, in which case I'm sorry, not sorry. But this is what the government did to my salamis. So last year, we had one of our salami days, and it was before we were as well versed in the Act as we now are. We allowed participants in the salami day to take some of the salamis home with them. It was $100 for an 8-hour workshop that included a long lunch, a band, and wine. They were not paying for salamis as well, but they'd all had been such a nice group and worked so hard. So we said, if you want to take one home and cure it, and you've got a place to cure it at home, please, by all means, take it along. So, half a dozen or a dozen did. And there was somebody at the salami day that was quite odd. This guy that just wouldn't engage, didn't ask any questions. He arrived early, left late, didn't come on the tour back to meet the pigs. Never said a word, just looked grim. And at the end of the day, we said, what do you think was the story with that guy? Oh, don't be paranoid. And anyway, we're not doing anything wrong. Right. Turns out we did. We let the salamis leave the property. So the next week, we were due to fly to France on a 6:30 flight the next morning. And at 3:30 in the afternoon, PrimeSafe rolled up the driveway and told us that they'd had a complaint. That guy. And they actually said, you have somebody in the industry who really doesn't like you. And yet they still felt compelled to follow the complaint. You can read the story of that complaint. I have a blog, if you're interested, called Tammi Jonas Food Ethics. It's tammijonas.com. And the last four posts are called The Regulation Diaries. And the first one is PrimeSafe's War on Salami Days. So you can read the rest of that story, which culminates in them making me pull down. It was actually last year. This is a different photo, but it was about that many salamis hanging there. And they made me climb up on a ladder, weeping, and pull every single one of those down and put them into that bin, and then they poured condemnation ink on the salamis. They wouldn't let us feed them to our dogs. They wouldn't let us take them into our house. They wouldn't let us have them tested. They were judge and jury, and they destroyed the food on the spot. We tried to appeal to their better nature. We said, do you understand the philosophy of this farm and how seriously we take raising animals and killing them for food? So to now waste that is the utmost disrespect. They said to us, the inspector, she's called all the way through the diary, she's called the inspector, capital T, capital I. The inspector said to me, Tammi, I don't really understand your way of life, but I respect it. I don't know what that means, actually, but it worries me that a meat regulator doesn't understand this. It doesn't. I don't understand this. So anyway, went through the act. We started to get our heads around what we could and couldn't do and how we'd made a mistake and how could we make sure that we did this better in future. And then the auditor came for the next audit. And she poisoned my smoked hocks because I'd put them in cryovac. And without going into all the regulatory details, you can't vac pack anything considered ready-to-eat food. Now, I don't consider smoked hocks ready-to-eat food. Who here eats a smoked hock straight out of the pack, right? That'd be like hock jerky. So we cook with these in Australia. And we're allowed to cryovac bacon because even though it goes through the same process, in Australia we cook bacon. But they don't apply that rule to hocks, so she destroyed them on the spot. Again, you can imagine by this stage, we're actually wondering whether we go back to the other model and find a butcher again and give it all up. Like, this is awful. Are you serious? Every time you come, you're going to destroy more of our product? Now, we haven't had any further product destroyed, but we've had a product line destroyed. In all their wisdom, the regulator about 3 months ago brought in new guidelines without consultation that in order to dry age beef, which many of you would know is a very common practice and has a very delicious result. We grow our animals our beef on to be mature, so they're 3 to 4 years old, which means because they're older, we want to hang them for longer because that tenderizes the meat. There's no filter on that photo. That's not like an Instagram photo. This is purple meat from the dry aging process. And that yellow fat is because those animals ate grass for 4 solid years. This was actually a slightly over 4-year-old steer. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever eaten. Under PrimeSafe's new guidelines, I can't do this anymore. If you want to dry age beef, you have to have a separate dedicated chiller. You have to have a velocimeter. It's not a dinosaur, I looked it up. That measures airflow, 0.2 to 0.6 meters per second. It has to be. Where do you measure? In the corner? At the ceiling? Where's the right spot to measure the wind? E. coli testing and thamnidium testing weekly. Those are about $150 a pop, those testings. So I can't do this anymore. I have to cut my meat when it's only up to 21 days. And that means our whole model has to change. I can't grow mature animals if I can't hang them. And now I have mature animals in the paddock, but they changed this overnight. So we're stuck. What do we do? Right now, we don't dry age anything. It just hangs in the chiller till it's ready to be cut. Oh, this is the summary of the new requirements. It's on the PrimeSafe website. And then this is part 5 of the diaries is going to be the regulation diaries. Now that's just silly. I use herbs from my own garden for all my sausages and porchettas. I call them single estate sausages. In order to do that, first of all, I had to put myself down as a trusted supplier to myself in my supplier register. And I said to my auditor, I said, Anne, I'm me. And she said, write it down, Tammi, or she was going to give me a minor, which is the next thing. If they catch you on a minor, the second time it becomes a critical and you actually go on to intensified audits. So it's not a small problem. So write it down, Tammi. So I wrote down my name and the name of the farm we were standing on as the supplier of the herbs. And then she said, and your phone number. Come on, Anne. It'll always be engaged. And I'll never ring back. So, anyway, I'm now a trusted supplier to myself. It's a good thing I have 2 hats, actually. And I also had to write a flow chart. This is my work instruction to myself so that I can use my own herbs instead of packets of herbs that are imported from Malaysia. Totes chop those herbs. So we're doing these lovely things. It's all meant to be no waste. We want to be as kind to the environment and our animals as possible. We want to be part of a community that values its food and feed people wholesome things. That's my first single mussels that I hung in the new curing room. So all of this has got us to the next point, which is now we find ourselves in the ridiculous position of having to figure out how to set up a defense fund to defend farmers against the government. They have one in America. So Joel Salatin, for those who don't know Joel from Polyface in Virginia, he's sort of rock star farmer. Everybody loves Joel. He was our major inspiration to farm the way we do. I went and saw it. So in June, I went on, as was referred to in your program, I went on what I called the Epic Fair Food Tour, because we've reached a point where we're totally compliant with everything we need to do, but some of it's just so stupid that it's time for it to change. So I went to America, and I got to see Joel at Polyface. He'd come here before and helped us talk about what the American Farm to Consumer Legal Defense does. They have a 24/7 hotline so that you can ring it for help. And that help is for when the government visits you. Like, just let that sink in. Oh no, the government's here. Where are we? Like, what kind of world are we living in where we need a hotline to ring if the government visits? That's bad, right? So we're working on a legal defense fund for Australia at the moment. Actually, our next working group meeting will be in a few weeks. If anybody's really keen to get involved, we'd love to have more people there. And we have lawyers, farmers, and activists involved in setting that up at the moment. Still unclear whether it'll become something quite closely affiliated with the Food Sovereignty Alliance or whether it'll be a completely autonomous body. But it's certainly something we see as, well, producers ring me every week and ask for help. You know, when McIver Farm, some of you will be aware of McIver Farm in, what's the shire? It's next to me. Macedon Shire, had her farm gate shop closed by PrimeSafe. Even though she doesn't process meat, she just wanted to sell it from her fridge in her shop. Now, I thought I'd lighten the mood briefly with something really cool. So in Boulder, when I was there, I learned of a really innovative program by their council that started in 1973. They formed a sales tax to fund the purchase of land as it became for sale in the peri-urban area. And it's called the Open Spaces Tax. And that allows the council to, or shire, I can't remember what they call it there, that allows them to buy the land, and then they will only use it for conservation purposes, or they sell it, or lease it, I should say, to local farmers. And here we were, I'd come from this problem where the farmgate shop, you know, Belinda's farmgate shop was being closed here, and here I heard a story of a woman whose lease from the shire is $6,000 a year to do organic farming in a diverse system of both vegetables and livestock. The council came to her, they loved her farming system so much, they said, we've got another lot of land that we'd really like you to take, because the requirement is going to be that it be organic, and we're going to need you to have a farm gate shop because people want that. That's pretty cool, hey? I reckon there needs to be more of that from our councils. I know there are a lot of issues around with state government interactions and things. So one of the reasons I was there as well was Slow Meat, which is an initiative of Slow Food USA. And that's largely established to fight the ills of industrial livestock agriculture and things that the American government has really gone down, as you would know, a very long path of allowing all kinds of environmental degradation and things we would certainly look askance at in terms of animal welfare. They even, you'll see in a minute, the cattle and feedlots that Chris showed you, I mean, that's the bulk of American production now. I couldn't resist the dry aging meat picture there, like that perfectly safe bit of dry aging meat that he will cut the end off and then sell you the lovely fresh bits of, because we don't sell you the moldy bits. They're just part of the process. And I put in this photo with Temple Grandin. Do any of you know who Temple Grandin is? She's a legend. She is a freak, yeah, but come on, she's autistic, so she's the foremost advocate for better animal welfare in processing systems. And so in particular, she's worked closely with abattoirs. She's also a professor at the University of Colorado. She was telling stories at this meeting of how in the bad old days, as she says, back in the bad old days, abattoirs were really terrible places and people abused animals and got away with it. And it was not good. When she started consulting and talking about ways to improve that, she's seen enormous improvement. And now she says that there abattoirs she goes to with 98, 99% accuracy in their stunning rates. And as you would know, a human wielding a captive bolt or some other form of, electric, whatever the form of stunning is, a human wielding that and a live animal moving, 100% accuracy is probably impossible. And so you have in your HACCP plan, you have the backup. In that 1% where somebody misses, You quickly grab it and do it again. And then it's dealt with, right? Nobody wants to see a stunning process not work, but it will happen. But the animal rights activists in America have latched onto a piece in their legislation that says complete accuracy. So now if a meat inspector standing in their abattoir sees you miss the first stun, and even if 2 seconds later you've stunned properly, they shut down the plant. In some cases for up to a week. You've got animals in the yards. You've got animals coming through the plant at that time. And yet the solution here is to shut down the plant? Like, this is where, she says back in the bad old days, we needed regulation. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle showed us that the meat industry had a lot of problems and needed stricter regulation for sure. And now we've gone to a point where it's beyond mad. It's going to stop production at all. And it's certainly not helping the animals when they shut down those plants. Cool, thanks. I'm almost done too. So this is a JBS feedlot. I didn't know if videos would work here. I had it actually flying over it. So one of the farmers that I spent time with flew me over this one. JBS is buying more of our abattoirs here, and there was a Senate inquiry that had public hearings in Albury last week while I was in India into the red meat supply chain and increasing concentration of ownership. So JBS in America are one of what are now the big three. In America, they had the big four meat packers that controlled 80% of the meat industry in America. And now they have the big three. While I was there, one of them bought the other. So it's three in a country of 330 million people. And that could happen here. Where are the regulators when this is happening? So that's 130,000 cattle. That's what, can you see this, like the cars, to get some perspective? It was enormous. This is just quickly to show that in America they are allowing things like mobile slaughter units. They realize they have a major problem in terms of the small producers seeking ways to do their slaughtering. And so unlike here in Victoria, they're allowing mobile slaughter again. You can tell because he's put it into this shed, it's not that mobile. The true story is because of the regulatory burden and what they're required to do, including provide an office for a meat inspector in America. They have to not only have a meat inspector present for all slaughters, they have to give them their own dedicated office. If you build something, you have to build the government an office. So, bring your own office. Anyway, he doesn't really move it. He calls it more like portable than mobile. I don't know if there's a big distinction. Point being, he can't make it viable because of how much he pays in regulatory costs, so including just the staffing. But really interesting to see these kind of things come up to service small rural areas where they've really lost access to abattoirs, which is a huge problem in Australia as well. And so those could be portable enough to move around those sorts of regions where you can't have one fixed regional abattoir because it's still going to be too far for lots of people, but you could move a small one around to different places. Oh, maybe this one will work. I don't know how. Oh, no, maybe it won't. No, that was actually a very cute little video. Again, I just wanted to, oh, maybe it will. It's only like 10 seconds. And it's gone. I don't think it likes cows, this thing. Anyway, it was a very sweet little video of Joel moving his cows at Polyface, because he's been in trouble with the government all the time. He's got a book called Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. And what he wants to do is move his cattle every day so that they're onto fresh feed and so that they're regenerating the land behind them. He doesn't want to set stock and destroy everything. So I was just going to show a picture of how what he wants to do is so lovely. And yet he's struggling as well. And he does slaughter for those who don't know, he slaughters his chickens on site now and processes them and sells them from the farm. So he has actually had some good wins in an open air roofed space. He's not inside a facility. This is a gratuitous photo with Michael Pollan. And totally just wanted to put that up. No, it's actually, again, to show though, we are obviously fighting corporate control of our food system, but we're also fighting governments. And I think that's really, well, I said it earlier, shameful. But also, we need to all have a big think about why is that happening and how can governments, not you, because none of you, I hope, work for PrimeSafe. Actually, maybe it'd be good if you did. But because people like us are actually gathering, we are networking together, we are working collectively, because we are going to fight the system that's stopping us from producing food fairly. So I'm going to finish with the future of fair food is sovereign. This is the definition AFSA works to, adapted from La Via Campesina's definition of food sovereignty. And it's about the right of people to nourishing and culturally appropriate food, produced and distributed in ecologically sound and ethical ways, and their right to collectively determine their own food and agriculture systems. So salamis, raw milk, smoked hocks, these are things that communities have a right to determine for themselves, and government, who we elect and who are meant to represent us, should be helping us work out the best and safest ways to do that, not stopping us based on other kind of false premises or corporate control. I'll finish there.
You happy to take some questions?
Of course.
Okay. Roving mic here, there's one.
Thanks, Tammy. Yep. I've actually been reading your blog, and I've got two questions. First question is, all things being equal, if you were to establish this kind of farm somewhere in Australia, your operation, which states, I guess, are the models to look to, is the first question.
Yep.
And the second question is, it kind of strikes me that we're missing a big part of the picture here. We've only kind of got local government and the community. So how do you want local government to support you deal with the state government?
Yep, those are good questions. In terms of which states, well, I understand Tassie manages to turn a blind eye to a lot of things, and so maybe that's not a bad place to be. I hope that's not like defamation or something. Yeah, right. New South Wales, in terms of their Food Safety Authority, they have a really good reputation for supporting producers and helping them work towards compliance, if that's the question, but definitely being interested and excited when they set up a farm gate shop, not punitive. On to the second question, the McIver case is really instructive in that, because what happened when that farm gate shop was closed is that PrimeSafe contacted the council, who had previously given them a Class 3 registration for them to sell the pre-packaged meat, because Section 5 of the Meat Industry Act has an exemption for any meat that is in airtight packages. PrimeSafe has determined that if everything you're selling is meat, so anything, if you're selling more than 50% meat product, it falls back under their jurisdiction and there's no exemption. We think this is contestable, but it's expensive to take it to court and contest. So PrimeSafe contacted the council. Council refused to renew their application for a Class 3. That wasn't very supportive. And then when the Hagans tried to work closely with their council to resolve the issue, because there's also an MOU between the councils and PrimeSafe, and so they asked for their assistance in negotiating, which is in the MOU, that councils and PrimeSafe will negotiate on behalf of potential licensees, etc. And they wouldn't. They wouldn't go to bat for them, and they wouldn't. Well, PrimeSafe refused to come to a meeting at first as well. They're now, I forgot to say, in case you missed it, we've triggered an internal review of PrimeSafe. So that's the good news. But yeah, so I think council's being more like mine generally has been, which is to say, how can we help you, and can we, as fellow government members, can we help assist you in the process of dealing with other levels of government? So even where it's not in your scope, we're your people. So help us, which is what I think Chris was saying as well.
Other questions?
Thanks for a great presentation. Can you explain a little bit about some of the work that you do through AFSA in regards to the fair food sovereignty?
Yes, so, well, a major campaign for this year has been around regulation, because especially having a producer as president, I started getting a lot of calls from producers, particularly in Victoria, because we're frankly the worst state on food safety regulation. Asking for assistance. So there's another one down in Gippsland rang me and said that they'd come, and not unlike Belinda's, where they just refused the next registration. In his case, they went into his shop and destroyed all of his product, and never even sent him a follow-up letter. So those are just some more of the examples where I get these calls, and then we said, well, AFSA has a need to help the producers. And food sovereignty movements globally have been led by producers, and AFSA started with urban activists and academics who are really concerned, which makes sense in a country like Australia that's 85% urban. But increasingly, because the producers are at the pointy ends of the problems here, they're the ones coming to us saying they need help. So regulatory frameworks are a major part of that problem. Connecting them for peer-to-peer sharing about best practice in regenerative farming and agroecological farming. We had a bit of a pass at a local food act for Victoria to start to kind of address some of the, get some principles in, and it's too broad, and the government doesn't have its head, the state and federal governments don't have their head around food policy at this stage, as far as we can tell. So we've gone back to more kind of pointed lobbying around things like farm gate shops. We're going to focus on that until that's changed, because you should be able to sell meat from your farm gate shop under a Class 3 registration, just like the IGA or the supermarket or anybody else is. It's ridiculous that we're not allowed to. And then now we're, as I was saying to you over the break, we're increasing our international relationships, and we just came back, we had a week in India at the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN funds all of that travel for the participants. And the thing we took away from that more than anything was that our responsibility as food sovereignty activists in Australia is to hold our government to account, because Australia is considered one of the evil three. So Australia, America, and Canada vote as a bloc at the FAO and at the Committee for Food Security and at the UN and kind of everywhere. And a lot of what they're doing is blocking improvements to animal welfare in livestock systems. And they're also blocking, they're insisting on keeping free trade agreements that are flooding local markets with cheap imports from Australia, America, and Canada. And that's literally destroying all of their livelihoods. So our comrades from the Global South in this meeting in India asked for our assistance, asked for us to sit at the table at those meetings with the FAO and the CFS and hold them to account and say, your people don't want this either. This is about corporate interest. It's not about people. It's not about communities. And it's certainly not about local food. So those are some of the key things we're working on at the moment. Thanks.
One more question.
This is probably opening a can of worms, so to speak. But I guess my question is around what we have in place. So obviously food safety legislation is there to try and protect people, and we've seen issues with raw milk and infants falling really sick and all that sort of thing, which is, I mean, I guess what would you propose to be a solution? Is it putting more signage on potentially more risky food products, or?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways forward for that. In Victoria, you may not be aware, they had a Senate inquiry into the impact of food safety regulation on farms and other small businesses, delivered in 2013. The government was largely uninterested in the recommendations in that report. So they've had a first pass at it, and I think maybe the review of PrimeSafe is kind of a second pass, and we'll probably need a third and a fourth. I think a science-based approach would help. Raw milk is an interesting one. We do give warnings about pregnant women and immunocompromised people not eating sushi or salami or raw milk cheeses or soft cheeses. Why don't we just put that on raw milk? Because it's only really a risk to at-risk populations. So yeah, I think some clear labeling about those things would be a pretty simple fix. And you've got to wonder what the motivations are around raw milk. Why is raw milk treated like heroin? You know, I spoke to one of my colleagues from Kenya in India about that you can be fined $60,000 for selling your next door neighbor raw milk. Can you imagine his response? He was aghast that that's what we deal with here. And so I think science would help, and I think not having corporate interests actually determining what our food safety regulations do would also really help. So how you split government and corporate interests apart, again, I don't really know. It's a tricky one. I think food safety that understands better what the processes and systems look like. A lot of what's wrong is actually, vested interests aside, is that the old regulation is set up for long invisible supply chains. industrial supply chains. And what you have now are these super transparent, minuscule supply chains. And we need to adjust back to that. Because like if you get sick from my meat, you know it was from my meat because we've had this conversation. So it's a very different thing to something that's imported from Denmark.
Fantastic. Will you please thank Tammi? I've got to give you your magazine, and you have to do the. Here's a Pip magazine, and you have to do the Lucky Dip for 2 seed packets.
Oh, cool. And it's spring. It's time to plant.
Yes, yes. I made sure we got fruiting veg and summer. I think there's one.
Great tomatoes. And they're organic, I'm glad to see. And pumpkins.
All right.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Tammi.